I see we've got a few people coming in. Just going to play a quick video for everybody.
Welcome everybody to Layer 7 Tech Talk.
Join the conversation.
This is a live chat. This is not scripted. It's fully open, so we can look to hear from you guys. You can take your questions through the team, through Facebook, and through Twitter.
Tech Talk for developers, engineers, and architects.
Simon asks, what are your thoughts on the AWS Econ web filters? That's a very interesting question.
No matter where you are, Layer 7 is ready to answer your questions live.
Send Marco in California, close from Chicago. We've got another question from the UK, so we're going all around the world.
Don't miss Tech Talk Tuesdays, live on Facebook
No sound on the video?
Tuesday. Brought to you by Layer 7 Technology.
Why is that? Morning, everybody. I see we've got a few people checking in already. Steve from Layer 7, and today we're going to talk API management, or engaging developers, engaging and managing API developers, sorry. And today I've got Dana Crane.
Morning, everybody.
Dana, maybe you want to just sort of introduce things for us and kind of frame
Sure.
frame the conversation.
Sure. I am the API management product manager here at Layer 7. So I've been working with APIs and our API solution for the last year and a half now. And I'm going to bring some of that expertise to the table today and talk about how we help you as an API publisher engage with your developers, or how you as a developer can take advantage of the kinds of things that Layer 7 offers in an API management solution.
Okay. And people are probably still sort of checking in a little bit. I just wanted to make sure, if you're at Facebook, if you're at the Layer 7 Facebook page, click on the live stream. On the live stream icon. There's a green arrow pointing to it. Click on it. You'll see the widget open up, and you can click the red button that says "Check in to chat."
Make sure you check in and chat.
Make sure you check in. Dana's ready to answer your questions. And then you'll see 3 tabs. It'll be Facebook, Twitter, and live stream. So if you're in Facebook, just stay there and chat your questions through the stream. If you're listening, you want to go out of the Facebook app, you can listen and submit questions through Twitter. Just use the hash Layer7Live, and we're monitoring the stream and just ready to take any questions. So hopefully everybody's kind of figuring out how to get in and chat, and we'll start things off with the first question. Generally, why are APIs so hot right now, Dana?
Yeah, so that's the big thing right now. APIs are very, very hot in the marketplace. A lot of people lining themselves up to get on board with this. Where'd it come from? So, back 30, 40 years ago when the earth was cooling and you and I were young, Steve, APIs were these abject programming interfaces, poorly put together, poorly documented, and really they're layered on top of a legacy app or a homegrown app that you had to work with these APIs in order to integrate it with the rest of the enterprise. Today, all that's changed. Now you've got these public open APIs that are well documented, robust, and provide business value in and of themselves. So how did that happen? Where did that transformation come from? Really, I like to think of it this way. Every 10 or 15 years, the computing world gives us discontinuous innovation. You've got something comes along, and all of a sudden there's a new business model that follows on top of it. The last time around, that was the World Wide Web, and this time around, it's really open APIs. So, what value does that bring? If you're a platform provider, say an ISV or a telecom, or if you're a Google or you're an Amazon, you've got infrastructure, you've got a platform on which to build applications. But that's a very risky proposition. Applications tend to fail in the marketplace. Very, very few go on to become gorillas in the marketplace and highly profitable for the companies. So if you've got a platform and you're building applications like, take for example, a Google. So Google is a great example of a modern day company, very, very successful. They're continually bringing products to market, but a lot of those just don't succeed. Look at Google Wave. Yeah, perfect example, right? A very recent example of an application that didn't make it in the marketplace. But there's also Google Knoll, the old Wikipedia killer, Google Health, which is languishing. So very risky proposition.
Google Buzz.
Google Buzz,
As well,
right?
that's just-
Sure, yeah, yeah. So yeah, obviously, very risky thing, lots of investment, lots of time, lots of effort to bring these things to market in very fierce competition. So rather than creating these applications, what APIs allow you to do is to expose that platform, that infrastructure to third parties, and then charge them to build out an application. So let's look at the opposite. Let's look at Amazon. So Amazon takes their infrastructure, makes it available through AWS, the Amazon Web Services, and now Steve, you and I can go in, rent that infrastructure, build out an application, and whether that application succeeds in the marketplace or doesn't, Amazon still takes a cut. So that really is a transformative thing for those kinds of companies.
So we've got a question too through the stream, so I'll just ask it. What are the big challenges? It's probably related to what you're already talking to. So, what are the big challenges for acquiring developers these days?
Yeah, so open APIs, they're everywhere. So you're competing for their eyeballs. You've got to be able to provide them with some really good value propositions to bring them into your APIs. And there's three key principal things you have to think of here. Number one, how can I save that developer time? So, these guys are busy, they're always on the go, they've got a lot of applications to create, they're under the gun all the time to get things done. So if you can provide them with an API that provides significant functionality so they don't have to spend the time building it, they can just link to you, slurp in whatever you've got available through your API, that saves them time and effort. The next thing you might want to think about is, if I'm not saving them time or effort here, how can I help them improve their skill set? So maybe you're an underemployed developer or you're an unemployed developer and you want your dream job, but you need to build those skills and prove that you have expertise in certain areas. So help them, provide them the building blocks, the kind of kickstarts, the kind of code examples, and sort of a step ladder to get where they need to get to build an interesting or a cool application that they can then put on their resume and show that they have the skills to get that dream job they're looking for. And the third thing to think about here is, if those two don't appeal, get them paid. So last time I looked, developers aren't averse to getting money for doing work. So if you can figure out a way for them to leverage their customer base and get money by exposing your applications or your functionality or your content to their customer base, that is another significant leg up for acquiring developers.
Next question too, from G. Hussein. I hope I'm saying that right. Coming in from Denver, Colorado. When does an API need an SDK?
So yeah, APIs, the simpler you can make this, the better. So, we've gone away from the old SOAP APIs, a lot of heavy structure associated with them. A lot of people these days use REST-based APIs, very simple, very easy. API documents tend to lay this out very easily. API explorers that help you interactively work with an API. All of these things are simple, easy ways to get your developer on board and working with it. An SDK, another great layer on top if you can make it simple, easy to use, and not a lot of overhead associated with it. So what you want to be able to do, of course, is make it as painless and as easy as possible for somebody to get on board with your APIs.
Great. Got a question that you sort of touched on. So you've got developers coming and looking, and how do you get them to the next stage, which is actually building the app?
Right. So that's a good question. So number one thing I talked about a little bit is reducing that friction. I want to onboard these developers, but I don't want to give them a big, huge wall in front of them that makes a huge barrier to entry for them. So, a lot of the API portals you see these days, they try to capture 30 or 40 fields to understand everything there is to know about a developer before I let you in the door. That's not the best way to go about it. You want to be able to capture simple things like a name and an email address as a point of contact for them. Then later, when they go to create an application, you can ask for more information. Now you can start asking them, what target platform are you building for? Or something like, how big is the user base you're targeting for this application? Those kinds of things where you sort of incrementally learn more about the developer as you go along. Don't put that big barrier up to entry, so it reduces the friction. Another way to do that is a quick start. So if you've got, say, a wizard-driven interface that allows them to understand quickly what they need to know, what they need to do in order to start building out their application. How do they start with that application? Where do they get their API keys from? How do they get their key secret? You layer on OAuth, how do I do that? Something that walks them through programmatically using a wizard can really help them get up and running quickly as well. And then, of course, I talked about a little bit API documentation, marrying that with an API Explorer so that you can see the examples, you can read through the code, but then you can reflect that in your API Explorer so they can interactively use those examples in your documentation to play with the API. So submit a query, see what the response is like, take something from the response, plug it back in, make another query, get more responses back. That sort of interactive ability to work with the API really encourages developers to understand and get moving quicker. But the key here, I think, is you've got to have a point man. You've got to have an API evangelist out there who is actively in the marketplace pushing forward your API. Advertising for you, interacting with your developer community, providing code examples, somebody who is that lead person who's willing to go to the fence to make sure that those developers are well served.
Good. Going to California now. Are the governance standards coalescing around APIs as they were in the SOA era?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's almost like a wild west out there still. REST is still the gorilla in the jungle out there. REST doesn't have the same kind of structure that SOA and services had. So yeah, it really is not so much about governance, it's about the whole streamlining thing, trying to get people on board. Could there be more structure? Could there be more governance? Absolutely. One of the things that we do here at Layer 7 is Waddle, which is sort of the little brother of WSDL. Where WSDL is very heavy and very structured, Waddle tends to be less so, but again, it's layering on some structure so that you have some idea how to work with those APIs, some idea of the resources and the methods supported by that API in a much more lightweight structure than a WSDL gave you.
Great. This is kind of a follow-up question. What needs to be included in API documentation?
Well, documentation can be as long or as short as you like. Getting succinctly to the point and helping people to understand the parameters they need to use, the kinds of examples that you can provide them, all that sort of stuff is the kinds of things that you want to make sure you make available to your developer community. But don't just leave it on paper. Make sure that that is integrated, like I said before, with an API Explorer so that you can take those examples and make them live. It's really when you go off of the page and into the interactivity, when you start exploring the API, that you really bring in those developers and make that API come alive for them.
So we have, just to let everybody know, we've got 2 more questions lined up in the feed, but I'm just going to go take one from Twitter in the meantime. So stay tuned, your question is going to be answered. Can you discuss best practices for API evolution and versioning, backward compatibility?
Right. No, that's a good question as well. So at any point, you're going to be wanting to sunset an old API and bring on a new one. So you go from API version 1 to API version 2. One of the things you want to be able to do right away is to have some sort of method or process that you've established within your organization on how to deprecate an API. So you need to be able to shut off the old API 1.0 so it can't be incorporated in new applications. And then you've got to be able to bring on the API 2.0 as a replacement. You never want to get rid of the documentation. You always want to have a documentation trail, make people understand that you've gone from 1.0 to 2.0, but they can see what went before. Best practice is you never want to lose any of the functionality going from 1.0 to a 2.0. You want that 2.0 to encompass the 1.0 functionality, so you're not locking out your existing customer base. So once I've deprecated that API and made sure it can't be included on a new application, I can now go ahead and introduce the 2.0 version, and then I want to migrate over my existing developers, make sure that they recompile their application using the new API and bring that out to market. So in this case, with our API portal, we provide a mechanism under the hood whereby you can find out who is using which of those APIs in what applications, and then specifically send messages to those developers to remind them that they've got some sort of a deadline here where you're going to say 1.0 will be sunset in 3 or 4 weeks. We've encouraged you to move to 2.0. I see your application is still on 1.0. You can check that out through the API portal, and you can encourage them to move in that way. And you can actually get under the hood and actually physically move their application from a 1.0 to a 2.0, help them migrate to help them understand they now need to go out and recompile that code. It's really up to you when you actually sunset that API. So when you want to take that API off the market and really impact your developer's customer base and say it's no longer available. When you make a call to that API, it won't respond. You can always leave it there, or you can do something else with our system. You can route to the new API. It fully supports the 1.0 version. You should be fine by bringing on the 2.0 version, sunsetting that 1.0 version, and away you go.
So that probably answers Jamie's question, what needs to be included in API documentation? Or is that maybe something different?
I think we already looked at the API documentation question, so I think we've already gone through there.
Okay, so that's similar to the Twitter question, which was API evolution and versioning.
Exactly.
Similar stuff?
Exactly.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear. So hopefully, David, that answers your question. If not, just throw through the feed something a little bit more specific if it didn't answer your question. Or if you have another question, feel free to fire them off through Twitter. Thanks. So we've got another question coming in from, looks like Massachusetts. How do or should API providers and developers collaborate?
Yeah, good question. So you want to be able to provide that collaboration between you as an API provider or you as a developer and the guy that's actually got everything working on the API portal. Some of the key points, of course, or key touch points, is the forums. So forums are really the way for you to get in and establish your community, make sure that developers are interacting with developers, and that as an API publisher, you provided real resources here. So, tech support resources are a great source. So some sort of developer support forum where people can ask questions and get access directly to technical personnel to help them answer it. Easiest way to lose a developer is to not be responsive around their questions. So you want to make sure that there's a two-way dialogue happening there. But you've also got to provide open API forums so that if somebody is creating applications against an API and they've got a question specifically about that API, you want to provide a forum for them to discuss that. You want to encourage people to answer those questions, not only your tech people, but other people within the forum. So being able to track those responses over time and then measure it and reflect that, sort of like a gold star kind of a synonym. So if he's got 100 replies, he gets 1 gold star. When he gets to 1,000 replies, he's got 5 gold stars. That shows real participation here. And once they reach that level, reward those developers. Send them something that says, we are appreciative of you creating this community and adding to this community. And in those forums as well, make sure they're interactive so that they can actually upload code or code examples or applications, or find some way to showcase those applications within your API portal as well, so that they get some reward and some benefit and some way of showing off what's happening. And that'll encourage other developers to participate as well.
Very good. Another one from G. Hussein. I'm not sure what the question is, so hopefully you do. Looking forward to more JSON schema and Swagger use for documentation and potential alternative auto discovery other than Waddle.
Yeah, so we talk about Waddle because it's an existing spec. It's been around for a number of years. It's sort of like we said, the younger brother of a WSDL. But there's a lot of people who just don't like the structure that WSDL, or they see that as tainted by the whole SOA and WSDL thing. So yeah, there's quite a bit of other ways of getting documentation, of ways of understanding interactively with an API or interacting with an API. Swagger certainly has a lot of popularity out there right now. A number of companies who are leveraging Swagger to auto-create documentation, for example. Documentation, obviously, one of those key points. Trying to keep up with the changes in documentation, trying to make sure that your document is always a live, up-to-date thing on the API portal is a tough job. So a lot of people would like a shortcut like a Swagger that can help you keep up as your APIs evolve. You can automatically keep up with that API documentation. I agree with you. Those are great things to look at, and something that we're looking at as well here at Layer 7.
Great. So maybe you sort of touched on this, but we've got another question coming in that you've got an API you want to make publicly facing. How do you make it available to developers?
Well, like I said, you've got to get the 3 key things down. Save them time, build their skills, or get them paid are the key ones to do. But there's also other ways to think about this, right? It's not just developers. Once you've made your API publicly available, you have to think downstream. Who else is coming in here? It's very easy that you could have SIs, for example, system integrators coming in. The system integrator is not exactly a developer. What he's really looking to do is find some tools that can help him reduce his time, reduce his budget on the projects that he's going to be creating. So providing that kind of functionality that an SI can link to reduce their overall cost of project is one of the key things you might want to look at. The other way to think of it is, of course, with ISVs. So if you're a product person like myself, what you might want to look for is functionality that's already available through public APIs that you can leverage within your own product. Now, before my life here at Layer 7, I was an old CRM guy. So we used to have a Salesforce automation tool that allowed you to embed mapping APIs within the tool. So if you were a salesperson and you were looking to go visit a prospect, you could pull up the map and it would show you where your customers were relative to this new prospect. So that way, when you went to visit the prospect, you could include customers on that trip as well. So being able to think about providing APIs that might be embedded in other companies' products as well is something to think about.
Okay, so keep those questions coming. A lot of them are sort of related, so you might have touched on some of these things. But so we've got our developers. Oh, we've got a follow-up question here from Hussein as well. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. If I'm not, I apologize. How does one differentiate, manage, or transition users from a public free API to a protected, registered, or paid API?
Yeah, that's an awesome question as well. So what you can think of is how do I get people in? Open APIs are terrific because they're low barrier to entry, frictionless, easy to work with, no pay models, so the developer comes in and starts working away. But you want to, at some point, realize some benefit out of this, and that may mean monetizing it. So different models, you can think of the freemium model. If I'm providing significant value, significant functionality, maybe I want to do it for support. So maybe my support forum is a paid for forum rather than a free forum that's there. Another way to think about it is putting up a pay barrier. So that pay barrier might be at 100,000 hits. So maybe I give you free 100,000 hits per day. Anything over 100,000 hits, you have to start paying for. So 100,000 hits is quite a lot of volume against an API. If you're getting more than that from a single application, that means you've got a pretty good user base on the back end of that application. So starting to charge for something like that makes sense. The other way to think about erecting a pay barrier is by saying, let's create new functionality or have premium functionality. So let's say I was a publisher or even a cable company. So maybe my regular programming is free via my streaming APIs, so that allows you to watch regular programming on your iPad. But if you wanted to get the latest movie, maybe there's a pay barrier there where I actually need a credit card and I need to actually interact with that. So to download that movie of the week, you've got to be able to pay some money in, and then I would kick that back to the developer. So there's different ideas that you can help you monetize.
Cool. What's your position on pure REST APIs versus implementations based on XML or other less mature technologies?
We're agnostic. We don't really care. We'll let you expose REST APIs. We'll let you expose SOAP APIs. We'll translate between the two. XML to JSON, we can also translate as well. It really isn't a question for the API publisher. It's a question for the developer. So what does the developer prefer to work with? Most of the time when we ask these days, they prefer to do REST and JSON. But there's no reason why you can't accommodate all of them.
Perfect. Still need some more questions. I see that there's been more people kind of checking in, but not actually asking questions. So if you've got something in your mind or on your mind, just make sure you fire it through the feed. And if you just joined in and you're still trying to figure it out, and you're in Facebook, just make sure you click the live stream icon, which you've done because you're here. But once you're there, check in or click the red button, check in and chat, and then you can feed your questions in. And Dana's doing a great job, has lots of good questions, and we're waiting for more. So here it comes. How can security be tied into the developer portal experience?
Right. Yeah, you definitely want to layer on security. Security can be a barrier. You want to make that as seamless as possible for your developers. Most developers don't like to deal with security. So if you can provide that for them or give them a leg up by guarding your APIs and making sure that you work with security protocols that are modern, things like OAuth. OAuth is certainly taking off out there right now. Allowing your developers to easily leverage that OAuth paradigm to be able to use within their application seamlessly to get access to your APIs is one easy way to think of layering on security in a sort of transparent manner to the developer.
Okay, another one from G. Hussein. What are some strategies for managing API registration?
Well, API registration. A couple of things to think about. When you've got an API portal and you're exposing those APIs out to the public, a number of them are going to be open. You want to be able to give them the base features, the base functionality very, very easily, very simply by exposing those publicly. But there's also going to be certain APIs that you only ever want to expose to your partners, or maybe you only want to expose it internally. At that point, you've got to start thinking about how a private API can be layered on here. And what we do within our own API portal is allow you to set some of those APIs to private. Once you've set them private, then the documentation, the ability to play with it, the API Explorer, the forums, then all become private as well. In order to be able to gain access to those private APIs, you have to be explicitly granted access to be able to incorporate those within your application. So that's one way of thinking about it. It allows you to segment out your customer base, providing the open APIs to certain people and providing those private APIs only to your valued partners, or maybe only available to internal developers.
Okay. Another question obviously related to developers and building apps. So you've got your developers and they're building some apps for you. And now what? How do you keep them engaged?
Right.
Probably
yeah.
similar to some of the other, like how to attract them, but once they're there.
No. How do you keep them engaged?
How do you keep them engaged?
So I want them to come back. I want them to build more applications. I want to make sure that they stay here. I want to make sure that they talk to their other developer friends and bring those guys on board too. So again, forums are a key part of that, measuring how much they participate and then rewarding them as they get to the different stages. I can track them, how many times they interact with the community via the forum. Great ways of doing that, but also reporting. So make sure that you can provide your developers with the reporting tools they need to understand how successful they're being. You want to help them understand which of their applications is gaining the most traction out there. You want to help them understand if there's latency inherent in this application, if there's latency inherent in the back end. You want to help them troubleshoot, make sure that they have the best performance they possibly can for their user base. And you want to help them understand who their best users are. So providing them with reports that can actually help them delve into that stream to find out that, yeah, sure, they're using this one application, but who are my key users on that application? Those kinds of reporting tools can be of real business benefit to the developer and help them understand their customer base.
Great. And a question from Virginia. Rodney asks, can you expand on how a company could use an API Explorer as a differentiator?
Yeah, API Explorers are key these days. So, everybody reads documentation, but not everybody understands APIs in the same way. So giving people an interactive tool like an API Explorer is one of those key ways of making those APIs more understandable, more interactive, more sticky with your developers, because they can get in and understand how those backends work. One of the demos that I typically give allows you to choose a resource from an API, submit a query against it, and get back some information. Then take that information, copy and paste it back into another query as a parameter, and resubmit that. Now you've just had an interactive experience whereby you've taken the superficial cut of that API to find out what kind of information is available, and then delve down to a deeper area whereby you can expose more information, understand more capabilities of that API. And it's that interactivity that really makes that API sticky for you.
Cool. So Rodney, I hope that answers your question. Another one from G. Hussein. Sounds like maybe even free or public users should register, just so that the flow isn't different if they change user class in the future. Is that reasonable?
We tend to break it out. So when you register and you come on board, don't care if you're a pay-for user or a free API user, we're just interested in onboarding developers, getting them into the pool. From there, you can then segment them. So we have something called an account plan. The account plan allows you to segment your user base. By default, they're all dumped into one bucket, a sort of a bronze account, a bronze tier that says, you come in, I don't really understand whether you're going to give me value yet. You're probably just building out your application. So we're going to put you in the lowest tier. If I've onboarded a specific partner that I know is valuable for my company, maybe I want to provide them with a silver or a gold tier, and that way I can segment them out and treat them differently. Maybe I want to give them access to certain of those private APIs I talked about. Maybe I want to give them a rate limit that's maybe 1 million hits. Maybe I'm trusting them all the way up to there for interacting with my back-end APIs. I can do all that through the logic inherent with the tiering of these developers. So there's many different ways to treat them. It's completely up to you.
Cool. Another question from Rob in Hingham, Massachusetts. In addition to an API portal, what other essential infrastructure components are required to support an enterprise API strategy?
Yeah, so we really think of the API portal as a great way to onboard and manage your developers. It's a key way to provide that business value add to the developer community. But for an enterprise strategy, what you really have to think about is, I need to publish these APIs and expose them externally. Once you start thinking in that vein, you need to have some kind of industrial strength tool that can really layer on the kinds of security that will make you comfortable in exposing these APIs. After all, these APIs are your bread and butter. These are things that you've run your company on for years, in some cases if you're an infrastructure provider. You want to make sure that those things are locked down, that they're secured, and they're not going to be infiltrated by exposing these out to the public. So layering on something like a layer 7 gateway that has bona fide creds in the security realm, this can really help you with your solution of bringing those enterprise APIs to market. And that's exactly what's incorporated in our API offering to the market.
Great. Jamie asks, how can you distinguish between APIs that are ready for use in a mission-critical app and those that are still in the early unsupported state?
So if I was an API publisher and I needed to test out a new API before I wanted to bring it to market, I'd use that private API function I talked about before. I'd bring this on board in our gateway and push it up to the portal so it's managed there. And then I would expose it as a private API and choose maybe 3 or 4 really good customers or maybe partners of mine that I would then expose this API to. They could then go ahead and test it out, hammer away, give me feedback on my documentation. All this is hidden from the rest of my users on the portal. They can't see that documentation. They can't play with this API in the API Explorer. I've only made it available to 3 or 4 different customers. Those are the guys that will help me understand whether this thing is ready for prime time. And once they do, I can then turn off that private marker. All the documentation will appear. You can now incorporate this in applications. You can play with it in the API Explorer, and that's the best way to bring something like that to market.
Great. Still waiting on more questions. If you have more questions, don't be shy. Just fire them off. Hussein, anything else? Rodney, anything else? If not, I mean, we can be starting to slow down. We're getting towards the end anyway. This usually runs about 45 minutes, 40 minutes. So if nobody else has any other questions, I see we still have about 20 people out there. So don't forget, the next one is going to be May 15th. Same process. Go to our Facebook page, click the live stream, and we're going to talk API monetization. And Jose here, if you can come into the... Jose is our technical guy who gives me all kinds of support, and he's actually going to be hosting the next one. Jose is a designer here at Layer 7, and I'm going to be away. And so we're going to talk API monetization May 15th, and Jose is going to be the host. So we do have another question from G. Hussein. How does one encourage developers to think in a layered API manner? Private, inter, public APIs. It's a good question.
That is a good question. It's making me think of layers too. A layered API manner. I'm not sure how to approach that question. I think I need a little bit more, can you give us a little bit more about how you're thinking in that manner?
Maybe explain it a little bit more.
I mean, one of the key things you want to do here as a developer is to leverage different APIs that are available publicly from different companies. So being able to layer on those different pieces of functionality and build out an application by taking advantage of different companies' APIs is one way to think of that. Certainly pulling it from different areas.
I missed a question too from Jamie, so maybe he can, Hussein, I'm sorry if I'm not getting your name right. You can maybe reformulate that question a little bit for Dana. And in the meantime, we'll answer Jamie's question. What can you determine through looking at usage metrics?
Yeah, so if I was a developer, what would I want to understand? If I was an API publisher, what would I want to understand? So from the publisher's point of view, I want to understand which is my best API. So which API is getting the most hits out there? If one of them is clearly incorporating more applications, getting more hits from the user base, that's where I want to invest my money going forward. I want to make sure I make an investment in that API because it is the most popular. I also want to compare applications. So who are my best developers out there? I want to be able to compare usage by application and then relate that back to the actual developer who made that application. And that way I can reward or treat those developers differently. We talked about account plans and how we can tier them through bronze or gold or what have you, bronze, silver, or gold. You might want to move up somebody who's seeing a lot of traffic or generating a lot of traffic for you into a gold plan, and that allows you to treat them differently. If I was on the developer side, what kind of information would I want to see? Well, obviously I want to see which of my applications that I've built is generating the most traffic as well. That's probably what I want to go, build out the next version of that, bring on a 2.0 version of that because that's popular with my user base. I also want to be able to track individual users. So if I can find out that there is an individual user, maybe who's providing a lot of traffic, I want to understand who that person is, maybe want to interact with them a little bit more, get some kind of feedback about my application and how it's working for them and how I can make it even better.
Looks like we got an expanded version of that question.
Okay.
So, SOA architectures tend to have different classes of services: technical, integration, business, that interact and are sequenced. It might be possible to have developers start thinking in an API-first manner, even when they're doing internal development, so that when a specific API needs to be either aggregated or exposed, the interface will be exposure ready.
Oh, by the way, you're pronouncing his
Oh,
name
thank you.
perfectly.
Good.
That's good to know. Right, so,
Thanks, by the way, for expanding on that question. I mean, this is exactly why we're here, so
right.
appreciate that.
So, developers, when they're building out their applications, as you say, interacting and sequencing these things, having them API ready, a lot of this has to do with how these are exposed, how you make them available, and helping them understand it. So by grouping your APIs on the portal, say you've got authorization or authentication APIs, maybe under a group called access APIs, by putting those front and center, they can understand that these are reusable components for access control. So then metering things out into, as you say, a business or a technical way of doing things, you can go down the chain. So helping your developers understand what APIs are available by grouping them is one way of doing that. So they can understand how to layer on the different functionality as they come in.
So hopefully that answers your question. Good questions. We really appreciate that. And if there aren't any more, I'll just, oh, here we go. Here's another one. Excuse me. From Eurus in Hercules, California. What a cool name for a town. Should there be a different URL for different stages of development, dev, production, for your developers? How would you handle level of trust that you provide to an application not yet complete, so you have control over private data like P11 or P11?
Okay, I think I understand what yours is getting at here. One of the key things to think about here is that when you first onboard a developer and they're going to start playing with those APIs, start building out an application, rather than giving them direct access to that API, what you might want to do is just stub it out. So we have an ability on the gateway to create API stubs, service stubs, that react in the same way that an API would without putting a load on your back end. So that's one way to think about that. Another way to think about it is with routing. So you might want to create a sandbox server that really is just for people to test against, for example. So if I want to have customers with an ability just to test an application, really provide some sort of load test against a server, I might want to route them differently, route them to a server that really is designed just to take server or test loads. And then when they go into production, I might want to route them differently again to a production server. All that is possible, depends on you, if that's the way you want to do it, through the routing. Another way to think about it is just to apply rate limits. So we provide rate limiting within our application as well, so you can just say, look, if you're going to be building an application, 100 hits a day or a couple of hundred hits a day should be enough for you to understand how to work with this back-end API. We're just going to rate limit you based on that back-end server, so that you're not going to overwhelm it with your testing regime or while building it out. And then once you move it into production, you can up that rate limit, so you give them 10,000 hits a day, something more production level.
Great. And thanks again, Hussein, for the explaining that acronym for me. Personally identified. All right. Okay. I couldn't tell if it was 2 1s or 2 L's or 2 I's.
There you go.
There we go. So, any more questions? Last call. We're getting towards the 45-minute mark. It sounds like there's lots of great questions out there around the topic.
Hopefully we get some good follow-up next week when we talk about things
Yeah.
like monetizing the APIs.
2 weeks, May 15th.
2 weeks. So one of those things we can just sort of preempt that topic right now, but once you involve a developer with your APIs, really what you're talking about is a B to B to C chain. So actually you've gone all the way from having a relationship with your developer to thinking about how you relate to that developer's customers. So when you're building out your APIs and providing that functionality, you really have to think 2 steps removed. I have to make things easy for my developer to onboard and build an application, but if I'm not delivering real value to their customers, then you're at odds with yourself here, and how can you help them monetize their APIs?
Right. Well, that's great. Thanks again, everybody. We hope you can come back if you're here today, May 15th, 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, I think we're on now. So API monetization, Jose is going to be the host, and hopefully there's lots of good questions. So thanks, Dana.
Great talk. Great being here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And thanks again for everybody for being here.